Okay, so welcome to phase two of the HSA Alt Science Linkage and Test Item Quality Study. My name is Dan Farley. Susan Forbes was also on the line talking to you, and you could hear her, and you probably couldn't hear me at that time. And welcome to all of you, our participants. Most of you have been involved or were involved in phase one. So tonight is really just a refresher to address any kind of questions or concerns you may have had about phase one or your role or your decision making, as well as to review the expectations for the pending phase two DIR science item review. The DIR process is exactly the same as what you all followed during phase one. The one exception is that you're linking into the DIR from your own respective laptops or computers. That'll provide some advantages in that the screens hopefully should be bigger. It also give you a little bit more flexibility to complete the work on your own respective schedules. So the training objectives, and you might recognize quite a number of these slides from phase one because they are literally the same. We're going to be looking at the linkage between the science test items and the grade level content standards, using the content specifications as a kind of defined mediator or pathway to that grade level content standard. We're going to be looking at the same dimensions of item quality, depth of knowledge, RDBC, accessibility, and bias and sensitivity. And again, we'll be using the distributed item review website. So with the HSA Alt, every item links to a specific content standard via content specifications, which you all are familiar with. We're going to be, in terms of depth of knowledge, you're going to continue to use Bloom's taxonomy as your theoretical frame of reference. And I'll have the same slide a little bit later, but we'll still be working at the remember, understand, and apply levels. Of course, test items that you come across should be accessible to students with significant cognitive disabilities and free of stereotypes and bias. They should also reflect appropriate academic content and depth of knowledge per the content standards and per the what you all know about the population and what they should be able to know and do at specific grade levels in science. So the engagement items for the phase two review, we've actually identified them. There's a little descriptor at the bottom to let you know that you don't need to determine whether or not there's a correct answer for an engagement item. Of course, the engagement items are based on teacher observation and a rating scale, so there is no correct answer technically. So that's the only kind of difference between the review processes. So we don't have the ELA and math examples anymore, but this is an example of a science item that's been reduced in depth, breadth, and complexity from a grade level content standard in science. So the science standard is to discover, invent, and investigate using the skills necessary to engage in the scientific process. And that's mapped out into 3 different grade levels, as you see, 5, 4, and 3. The content specification 3 typically relates to the lowest grade level, and the content specification 1 typically relates to the highest grade level, and 2, of course, the grade level in between. So in this case, content spec 3 matches the 3rd grade level standard to pose a question. Content spec 2 goes with the 4th grade level, and content spec 1 goes with the 5th grade level. That same pattern is typically followed for grade 6, 7, and 8 in middle school, and then of course science is pretty clearly defined in high school as just 1 grade level. So this is the same sample example science item. This is an online item. But it gives you an idea of the structure of an online science test item, where they have 3 answer choice options, and they select the answer that addresses the question. Of course, you're looking at item quality, not just in terms of content, but design, that the items have a correct answer, that there is a near distractor, and that there is a far distractor. And any time that you have questions or rate that as a 0 or a no, of course, we'll want to hear from you about why. One of the things we did notice as a pattern that we would hope to not have in phase 2, there was a fatigue factor with regard to the comments. So we noticed as the day went on that we received fewer and kind of shorter responses to why you rated an item a 0 or a no. And we would like to have your full rationale in all cases where a 0 or a no rating is effected. So again, the same judgments in three main areas: content performance, accessibility, bias sensitivity. The 5 questions that we've incorporated into the DIR are exactly the same. So you'll first rate the linkage using our 0, 1, or 2 ratings. The depth of knowledge question is a match question. So the item is at or above the DOK that is required in the content specification. This is one of the ratings that is specific to the content specification, not to the content standard, because we don't want the depth of knowledge to match the grade level content standard, of course, because that would make it too difficult. So the expectation is that the DOK is at the level of the content specification or above, but not as high as the grade level expectation. So the third is to rate the appropriateness of the reduction in depth, breadth, and complexity. That appropriateness can have several different aspects on a continuum. So RDBC means they could have an item that was reduced too much so that the content really has been changed, all the way up to the point where you have an item that wasn't reduced enough to be even marginally accessible for students with significant cognitive disabilities. And we had many comments along that spectrum for folks who had concerns about how difficult the science items were in most cases in phase 1. The fourth question is the item accessible to students with significant cognitive disabilities with sensory impairments. And it's really focused on sensory impairments, but any impairment that might get in the way of that student's ability to access the item is intended to be covered by this question, such as orthopedic impairments, etc. And finally, is the item free of bias? So again, anytime you provide a 0 rating or a no rating, we want to hear in the comment section about why. What was your rationale? Because those statements really help us work with Hawaii Department of Ed and AIR to make the assessment better on an item level, which is very helpful. So the first question, the definitions for each of the ratings. The 0, again, is that there is no connection between the item and the grade level content standard as mediated by the content spec. Sufficient linkage is a 1. That means there's a connection that you can see between the item and the grade level content standard that's mediated by the content specification. It's recognizable, but it's not as strong as it could be. And then strong linkage means there's a clear connection that's obvious, okay? So those are the same exact definitions that we had during phase 1. DOK, I'm not going to go into too much definition aspect of it, but it's exactly the same approach that we took. So given that we work with students with significant cognitive disabilities, you'll remember that most of their cognition is occurring, or the cognitive processes that are occurring at the remember, understand, or apply level. If you have students with significant cognitive disabilities, completing 1 or 2 step problems using an algorithm, that's about as difficult as we can expect. And we are aware of that, so we try to write items exclusively at the lower 3 levels of Bloom's. So in terms of remember, some of the example verbs that you might see in an item, these have to do with recall, or recognition. So the type of verbs you'll see are find, identify, match, recognize, recall. Sometimes describe if it's a very simple description. At the understand level, which is the next level up, some of the verbs you might see are classify, illustrate, categorize, compare, infer, explain. It's basically where the students are having to take a new concept and apply kind of a categorical bin to that particular concept using their prior knowledge. At the apply level, they're actually solving a problem that should be novel. So they're solving, they're using, or they're executing might be some of the example verbs you see in the items. Of course, as we discussed in July, complexity is a dance that occurs across the entire standard. So the verb doesn't necessarily define how complex an item or a standard is. The verb and the content kind of work together to define complexity. So you have to consider all of the above when you're working through this process. So this is an example of a DOK rating. So the content specification 3 is to answer literal questions related to concrete ideas in the text. This example item is, I'm going to read you a sentence. John used his pencil to write a story. What did John use to write his story? A pen, pencil, or typewriter? The discussion is whether or not that item is at or above the depth of knowledge required in the content specification for this one. And this is a writing example. We didn't develop a science example for this one. But the item and standard are both at the apply level of Bloom's taxonomy, because they are asking the student to actually encounter a novel situation and apply an algorithm independently. They're therefore a depth of knowledge match, so you would record a yes for this particular rating. So this is a good science item. So this is content specification 3 again, match an organism to its habitat. The item says, here is a lizard, match the lizard with its appropriate habitat. Do lizards live in the rainforest, the ocean, or the desert? And then the students shown pictures of those particular answer choices. So this particular item and the content specification are both at the remember level of Bloom's taxonomy, because it's a matching task, and it's asking them about something that they already understand. Therefore, it is also a DOK rating of yes for this one. The third question asks you to evaluate whether the reduction in depth, breadth, and complexity was appropriate. I talked a little bit about the continuum that you're interested in. A 0 rating means it's inappropriate, means the item has been reduced inappropriately, either not enough or too much, such that it doesn't represent the content, or that it's much too difficult, as you can see in the parenthetical. A 1 rating means that it's somewhat appropriate. That means it represents an appropriate, a relatively appropriate balance between the prerequisite skills that are required to access some of the academic content and the highest professional expectations for students with significant cognitive disabilities. It's at that in-between stage. And then the last rating is a 2. Oh man, I was hoping that wouldn't do that. Sorry. Which is entirely appropriate. The item clearly represents the grade level content and performance at a level that conveys an appropriate balance between prerequisite skills and the highest professional expectations for SWSED. So in the middle, the somewhat appropriate, it doesn't exactly strike an appropriate balance between prerequisite skills and the highest professional expectations, but it's not inappropriate. So it's kind of in between entirely appropriate and inappropriate is when you can default to the 1 score there. So some general things to keep in mind when you're considering reduction in depth, breadth, and complexity. Has the content been held constant? In other words, you want the item to be about the same stuff that the content standard and content specification are about. Has the DOK required to respond to the item been sufficiently reduced but not overly simplified compared to the grade level content standard or in the content specification? Has the breadth of knowledge required to respond to the item been sufficiently reduced? And have the cognitive demands been simplified such that access to the content is maintained, and high standards are also maintained, but it's not an overly complex expectation. In other words, you want to keep in mind a very high aggressive expectation for students with significant cognitive disabilities, because that's what tests are trying to do, is push that envelope. But it shouldn't be at a level where it's kind of almost ridiculously difficult or ridiculously high, if you will. And again, the RDBC ratings are 0, 1, or 2. The fourth question involves accessibility for students with significant cognitive disabilities. Keep in mind that there are accessibility supports, so that there are adaptive instructions as well as accessibility limitations. And I'll show you a resource that's on the DIR that tells you which tasks or which items and which tasks have those particular options, and you need to think about those ratings for accessibility within that lens. In other words, don't rate an item that's inaccessible to students with visual impairments inaccessible given this rating if that item isn't even administered to students who are blind because it has an accessibility limitation option, okay? And I'll explain a little more about what that means in a second. Another thing is, if you do give this a no rating for accessibility, try to explain to us how you would fix the particular item to make it accessible as well. And the item should be clear, concise, short, and construct relevant in order to be accessible as well from a cognitive perspective. But this has more to do with sensory challenges, color blindness, those sorts of topics that you guys focused in on during phase one were entirely appropriate. And the fifth question, the final question, is asking you to look at bias and sensitivity. Are there any potential biases related to the groups that are protected, or sensitivity related questions? In other words, topics that an assessment shouldn't be talking about because they might upset students. So again, that one is a yes or no. Of course, if there is a no, we really want to know why or how that item might be considered biased or insensitive to help us make it better. I'm not going to spend much time on this one because it has to do with registering for the DIR, and all of you have already registered, those of you who are on right now. I'll come back to that in a second. So once we are done with today's webinar, I will be assigning you all 3 reviews. So there's a grade 4, 8, and 11 review for science, and each of them has a different number of items than phase 1. You'll carefully confirm the details, the subject, the grade, etc. You're going to be getting the elementary level, the middle school level, and the high school level reviews. You're going to look through the resources. The same videos are on, and obviously it's the same instructions. It's the same process and the same web format. The one resource that is different, there are 2 actually. We're not providing you with the original test booklets because of the test security concerns. We're also changed the accessibility options and access limitations, adaptive instructions and access limitations document to match the items that you'll be reviewing. So once you want to start the review, you click on the next button at the bottom and it walks you through the process. You guys are all very familiar with the way that the DIR looks and how to go back and forth with the items using the scroll. So I think that is going to come to be second nature to you. So again, we want you to look at all aspects of every item, the adaptive instructions, the access limitations, the student materials, passages and graphics that are included with the item, the prompts, there are the questions is another way of asking that, and the students' correct responses, except for those items that you can see are clearly engagement items. There is no correct response for those. We'll want you to scroll down and review the item, the grade level content standard, and the content specification that's associated with that item before you go forward with answering the 5 questions. So this is an example of an AIR and Hawaii alternate assessment test item in math. So the script is again pasted into the DIR, so you're not going to have to read the small print, but we do include pictures, screenshots of the entire test page just so you can see how the scoring protocols are laid out for the test administrator. But you don't have to read all of the subtitles. It can kind of help you keep track of where you are and whether or not you're looking at the right answers. The right answer is always highlighted in green, both in the scoring protocol as well as on the distributed item review website, so that's kind of helpful. The review questions, again, are toward the bottom. You'll see the 5 review questions that we've already discussed this evening and that you've used before. On the left-hand side, on the right-hand side, you'll see the code for the item, as well as the grade level content standard. Below that, you'll see the content specification written out. So we want you to digest all of that information. So you record your ratings. If you give us any 0 or no ratings for questions 1 through 5, we want to hear about why in the text box for item 6. And don't forget to save and continue as you move through the process. So, and I just said this, so answer all 5 questions. 0 or no, we want to hear about it, and save and continue. Save and continue moves you to the next item and also saves your responses. So in the DIR, because you'll be working kind of on your own schedules, I want to assure you that you can stop and start your review at any time. The DIR will keep track of everything that you've successfully completed, and by that it means saved and continued. So if you haven't clicked save and continue on a particular page, it may or may not remember where you were there. It depends on the memory that you have in your computer, actually. But don't count on it remembering something if you didn't save it, okay? And the DIR does remember the last item that you did rate and save and continue by showing a green dot right next to that item. You can go back and edit any item during the review process until the review is ended on October 15th. and you can just click Save and Continue to save any changes that you feel are necessary. And we aren't going to be, we're going to be watching and making comparisons of your results on a pretty regular basis. However, we won't be calling you together, of course, to discuss how your results are comparing to others. What we will do is if we see that one of you has kind of gotten lost in the weeds, I'll send you an email and give you a call and try to talk to you about how to recalibrate your ratings based on what your peers are giving in particular areas, of course, and with specific items. Again, anytime we have a discussion about that, we're not telling you that you need to change your ratings. We're just informing you that your ratings are inconsistent with your peers. And it's usually not a question or a concern if it's one item or two items. It only rises to a level of concern if we see a pattern of disagreement. So, for example, your ratings are just consistently harsher across all 5 questions than all of the other folks who are reviewing the items will probably give you a holler. Or your ratings are consistently much too lenient compared to some of your other some of your peers, and we might give you a call on that too. All right, so this process is aimed really exclusively at looking how items relate to standards using depth of knowledge, reduction in depth, breadth, and complexity, accessibility, bias, and sensitivity as the lenses. So we're not asking any of you to make judgments about the appropriateness of the alternate assessment at large or any accountability policies. Those kinds of things are definitely important for schools and for teachers and for us to talk about, but we don't really want them to be part of an alignment study or linkage study. We really want you to focus in on the task at hand. The item graphics and text, if you think that, for example, some of the graphics are too small or some of the words are too small to read, remember that these items don't look exactly the way they look on the DIR that they do when students are presented them, either in a tablet administration or in a paper pencil administration. So don't be overly concerned about sizing of graphics or text. Those things are in better shape on the actual operational tests. So in terms of next steps, we are going to ask you, those of you who are on the call right now can simply go through the process of logging into the DIR website. Actually, you guys, after this webinar, I'll be sending you your assignments, which will come to your email that you used to register on the DIR website last time. So you don't even need to register or log in. You can just click on the emails that I send you. Each of you will receive 3 emails, one invitation for the elementary school review, one for the middle school review, and one for the high school review. And you can do those in whatever order that you see fit. It might make the most sense to start with elementary, go to middle, and then to high, just so you can see the whole kind of gamut as it develops. The deadline here is really critical. The reviews have to be completed in order for us to analyze the results and develop a technical report in time for the Hawaii Department of Education. We need your reviews done by October 15th. My understanding is that next week is a week where you have a little bit more freedom from professional responsibilities, at least in the public school settings, than normal. So hopefully that won't be a problem for any of you. But the review is going to close at 8:59 p.m. your time on October 15th. So that gives you 2 weekends and a full week to get through 300 total items. If you do run into a situation where you need assistance, please contact us. We can be super responsive via email, and you guys all have my phone number too if you need to call or text me. The staff contact information is here. It's the same as it was before. So if you do have troubles, I'm the primary contact for phase 2. If you can't get a hold of me for some reason, I might be presenting or something and not be able to get back to you immediately. You're welcome to contact Serena if you have any troubles and I'm not being super responsive. All right, so now we've gotten to the questions section. So I'm going to go back and unmute everybody.
They've still got gaps. They've still got, you know, my example's always
you're unmuted now. Just making sure you know.
They don't know those yet.
Okay. Everybody's unmuted. So now I'm here to ask answer any
This is
questions that you
classroom.
might
So
have.
what they're doing in the classroom, multiplication table and calculator accommodations. And we checked on that with a variety.
All right. I muted Susan because I don't think she realized she was off mute.
So you're just gonna, so all I have to worry about, this is Michelle,
Yep,
is that you're gonna send us an email and then we can just click on from there.
that's correct.
And then all I gotta do is make sure I'm done with all my 3 sections by October 15th at 8:59 p.m.
That's correct. You got it.
All right.
And if you encounter any troubles
Okay.
working through the process, all the items on the DIR have gone through a pretty substantive quality assurance review, so there shouldn't be any kind of technical problems. But if you have
And then can you send us this PowerPoint so because I referred to some slides.
Sure. Yeah. In fact, the PowerPoint I will just load onto the DIR so that you
Okay.
can have it embedded in your reviews.
Thank you, Dan.
Easy to do, you bet.
That'd be great.
Hi, this is Lynette. I wrote down it doesn't open. So does it open tonight or does it open tomorrow?
It's already open. You can't access it until I email you your assignments, and that's going to happen the second I get off this call.
Okay. And how long do you anticipate we should take on this? Is it taking like 5 hours of time?
I'm
engaged.
Oh no, I'm guessing that it's going to take. So remember, in phase 1, in science, there were about 240 items reviewed. However, so that was over a 3-day period, and then the first morning was a pretty substantive training that we were able to condense today. So I'm guessing that it's 300 items this time. So our projection is that it's going to take you about 24 hours.
All right. So just kind of divide up our time by the time whatever we make for it.
Exactly. If you can do it in 2-hour chunks, 4-hour chunks, it'll slowly fall away and you'll be done.
Okay, and this is all science, not math or anything else, right?
Only
Correct.
science. Correct.
Science.
And I just got a question. Do we need to re-register on the website? You do not need to re-register. I'll just use the same username and password that you already have entered in the system for phase 1. There's one person involved in phase 1, and we'll get that person registered through the DIR first. But the rest.
What if I don't remember that, the registration?
Yeah, we did that during the morning.
I know, but what if I don't remember?
It's in the PowerPoint.
Was it?
You don't have to. I'm going to be sending you an email. All you have to remember is to follow what the email tells you to do, and that's literally just clicking on a link.
All right.
Okay, I didn't have a password. I didn't use a password, so I just click. I'll still get through.
You should have. You should have created a password. But because I will be creating the assignments for you, it should allow you to access the DIR through that link regardless. If not, let me know and I'll get you set up.
Okay.
Thank you.
You bet.
Okay, so if that's it, I'm good to go then until you send me that stuff.
Yep. I will send you
All right.
3 different emails, and you can use the links in those emails to access the review.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'll stay.
Signing off.
Anybody else who wants to keep
Signing
asking
off.
questions, but you guys can sign off anytime you feel the need.
Yep. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Dan, are you still there?
I'm still here.
Oh, sorry. Brian's, we're having an in-depth discussion about multiplication table. But anyway, sorry, I checked out there for a sec.
No, that's fine. And I had unmuted everybody, and I realized that you didn't realize that, so I just muted you again.
Yeah. Anyway, thank you for doing that. I noticed there was 4 people that weren't there today.
Yeah.
And so I've noted who they are. I will follow up with the email. One thing I didn't find out was which Michelle